So we called it Rwanda, Genocide in Rwanda, Lessons Learned and Forgotten after 25 years. As you know, we're right at 25 years after an incredible world event that we want to talk about tonight. A couple quick announcements, and then I want to offer a prayer as we begin this session. As some of you, most of you hopefully know by now, we originally planned this around General Romeo Dallaire, the Canadian general that was commanding the UN forces in Rwanda during the genocide, and has quite a story to tell. Unfortunately, because of personal issues, he's unable to be here. But we've got an excellent person to tell the story from another perspective, and then we'll have a couple of respondents, and then open up for some questions and answers. You can see how to text in questions if you want to text in questions or comments. I am fully aware that this is a very delicate subject, and it's one that has deep feelings on all sides. As I've thought about it from the medical world, the deeper the cut, the longer the healing process, and the more difficult the scab. And it may be too early even to pull that scab off after 25 years for some, because of the depth of the pain that was felt on all sides of this tragedy. I'm probably most concerned, though, not about recounting history than I am about looking at the future. What can we learn from this? Because unfortunately, as you know, this story can be told on one scale or another at a number of other countries around the world. This is not a unique Rwandan thing. This is literally happening time and time again in many different countries in different ways, frankly, including some of the polarization we have in our own country. So that's, I'm hoping, the way we can kind of move our direction is towards how does healing take place? How do we aid and abet that process? And how do we learn from the lessons of the past? I'd like to begin by offering a prayer. A prayer for healing, a prayer for gratitude for those who have survived, and particularly for those who are now working in that country and developing its future. Let's bow our heads together. Our gracious Father in heaven, we come together tonight to think back to a horrendous period in the history of this world, cornered in a country and surrounding countries, but very much one felt by many of us. We seek your presence, Father, as we seek healing, we seek understanding, as we seek a path to the future that can help all of us to become the kinds of neighbors, the kinds of friends and colleagues that you expect. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for bringing this group here to spend time together, we pray. Amen. Let me just make a couple personal reflections on Rwanda. As many of you know, I've got pretty deep roots in Africa, and I've been in and out of Rwanda many times. I can remember getting a call from the Ministry of Health, I think probably in 1995 or 6. I don't remember for sure, just a year or two after the genocide. Can you come please out to Loma to come please help us reestablish our healthcare system? So I traveled out there, and it was short enough after the battle that there were still signs of the trauma in the country. There were 32 hospitals in Rwanda at that time. They had 100 doctors left in the country caring for around 8 million people. And it's from that base that you recognize the enormity of the rebuilding that had to take place, because many of the professionals who had a chance to leave the country either left before the genocide started or escaped during the genocide. And when you have a chance to move away from tragedy, usually you do. You have family, you have friends, you have obligations, so no one can fault those who moved away. It's interesting for me to watch and listen now, though, because those who left are not considered real survivors, because they weren't there during the tragedy, and that's, of course, understandable by those who went through this. It was precipitated, as you know, by an airplane shot down on April 6, 1994, that killed both the president of Rwanda and the president of Burundi. And there's still debate on how that plane went down, which side actually brought it down, whether there was those who were seeking to precipitate a crisis or exactly what happened to that airplane. But it was clear that planning for this episode was well underway by the time that happened, but that was a precipitating event that started us down the road to this genocide. The estimate varies, but approximately 800,000 people were killed over the matter of the next 6 weeks. Both Tutsis and also moderate Hutus, who sought to protect them, who sought to care for them, and so on. And we'll hear some of those stories this evening of what it took to work through this tragedy. The government quickly put in a program of reconciliation, and I've had the privilege of taking part in some of those and watching what was happening as they sought to bring about the reconciling that needed to take place between the two tribes. There's a long history that you can go back and look at how Hutus and Tutsis became different peoples. It goes back literally centuries, and how one tribe got patterned into one particular kind of thing and another into another. One of the tragic stories, and if you have an interesting book if you want to read, is the one entitled, "I Wish to Inform You That Tomorrow We Will Die with My Family," written by an Adventist pastor, holed up in the chapel at Muganera Hospital, where I've visited many times. One of the chapters in that book tells the story of a group of, even after the genocide was winding down, that terrorists, if I can call them that, came into a girls' school in Kibuye, the district capital, not too far from Muganero, and says, okay, which ones are your Tutsis and which ones are your Hutus? And they knew their intent. They were going to kill the Tutsis. And the girls stood tall and said, we're Rwandans, and refused to identify themselves as one tribe or another, and they shot them all. But there was that level of pathos that was going on in this country, and of course spilled over into Congo, into Uganda, into Tanzania, to Burundi. That tragedy has impacted the world. In my view, it's a tragedy on the face of the Western world, who refused to step in and said, no, this is a local conflict, let us not do anything. The U.S. government, the French government, the Belgian government, by and large said, no, let's stay out of this. This is not our battle. Not unlike some of the questions we face today in tragedies around the world. How do you get in? If you're going to go in, how do you go in a way that's appropriate and understanding of all the variables that are there? Loma has been involved with Muganera Hospital now with what's called the Adventist University of Central Africa, or AUCA we call it, beautiful new campus just on the edge of Kigali. The original Adventist University of Central Africa was in western Rwanda and is a site of one of the massacres. And so the church, when the massacre was over, that sat idle for many years, did not have the heart to go back and reactivate that campus, and finally sold it to the government and have reestablished a new university near to Kigali. The chapel at Muganera Hospital, the tradition for years was that when tragedy came, if tribal tension increased, go to the churches. You'll be safe in the churches. They won't come into the churches. And so that's what happened, is people flocked to the churches, but they were no longer safe. And in the chapel at Muganera Hospital, they estimate roughly 3,000 people were murdered in that chapel. And for years as we traveled out there, there was boxes, rough wooden boxes of skeletons, of bones, left in the front of that chapel as a marker. And now various other memorials have been set up. I can remember very clearly being out there quite a few years after the original genocide, and they were just in the process of establishing a memorial about probably half an hour from Muganera Hospital. And so we went over to see it, and it wasn't ready yet, but there was a guard there. It said, if you'd like to see in my shed. There was a rough tin shed there, a mabati shed. Some of you know the style that is often in Africa. And so we said, sure. I think we gave him a bottle of Coke to get in the building. And as we went in, tables, 4 by 8 pieces of plywood covered with skulls, row upon row upon row. And then another part of the building was tables covered with femurs. It never was clear why they kept femurs and skulls, but that was what was in there, waiting for the memorial to be established, for the story to be told. There is an incredible memorial building in Kigali now. If you ever have a chance to go to Rwanda, I'd encourage you to visit. It tells that story and all that happened in that country. Today, Rwanda is probably the most rapidly developing country in Africa. It's sometimes called, has been called the Switzerland of Africa as a country. And Kigali, the capital, is often referred to now as the Singapore of Africa. Clean streets, modern buildings, skyscrapers going up, tremendous amount of progress is being made. And yet it is still that story that haunts that country that I think will take several generations yet before we clearly can move beyond that. It's a lore that lingers in cultures for years and years. So tonight we're here to recognize, and certainly not to celebrate, to recognize, remember, and learn from the tragedy of 25 years ago. And we're delighted to have Emmanuel Habimana with us. He will start out. Emmanuel is a survivor of the tragedy out there as a young man. He's been featured by National Geographic, and we'd like to invite him to tell his story, and then we'll have several respondents and open up for questions and answers at the end. So, Emmanuel, thank you for being with us. It's all yours.
Everyone, before I start, I just want to show you a piece of a film that I've been my first film actually that I worked with related to what Dr. Holt just said, and it's summarized. I wish I could have like a time to show you the whole thing, but I'm sure we'll have another time to have like a screening night and so see where he goes. And so I think the tech people should, and then I'll come back.
Kuko ubuzima bwasaga naho butariho rwose, ni ukuvuga ngo ubuzima ntibwari buriho, byasaga naho birenze imitekerereze y'umuntu.
In 1994, Rwanda lost an estimated 80% of its minority Tutsi population to one of the most successful genocides in human history.
The government knew absolutely that. We were not there in a role to protect civilians. In fact, a Chapter 6 mission is not allowed to protect civilians.
Nearly 1 million innocent lives were lost.
They choked everyone, including my mom.
Suddenly, Rwanda, this tiny African country, had been left with the highest percentage of orphans in the world.
It was really a whole traumatized population. But I'm sure I can safely say that the recovery was surprising.
I don't agree with people who want to, you know, just kind of pull on your heartstrings and make you feel all sorry for the orphans and pity them. You know, horrible things have happened to them, and yes, their situation could be looked at that way. But when you have time to spend with them, you think, no, this isn't poor and pity. This is, wow, strong and courageous.
In the summer of 2010, I began a journey with my friend Emmanuel.
I felt like if I become like a storyteller, the world will know about the orphans and what to survive means.
In a world he grew up in, and one that I was experiencing for the first time, we set out to learn what recovery really means to a population who lost their parents to the worst crime on earth, a population he has been part of since childhood. What we started as a simple documentary project soon became a worldwide journey to find the answers to questions Emmanuel had been waiting his entire life to ask, from his peers.
Nshobora kuza gufasha umwana wahungabanye nanjye ndi umuhungabana ntabwo bishoboka. Mbere na mbere ndabanza nkumva ko ari umuntu ngiye kugira inama.
His family.
Zamenye ko minwari yagiye batikira kakirabonetse. Baratangira rero bica abantu barapfa.
Those who saved.
Nkasanga nyine nta kundi ngomba kwitambika nkabani kugira ngo ntaze kureba n'ibyo ari byo nagiye mfe mbere gusa nze kureba ukuntu banyikira abana.
Those who witnessed.
He's like, please don't go. If you go, they're going to kill us. But he promised me that he would stay while I went to try to find help.
And those who participated in the genocide. in a society where all such people must coexist. Rwanda's orphan community is the youngest demographic of people who retain memories of the genocide that took 1 million lives in just 100 days.
My daughter come and ask me, why I don't have my grandma? So it's hard.
As they reach young adulthood and begin raising the next generation, their recovery and the lessons they pass on will, in a large part, determine Rwanda's future.
The question is how do we prevent it from happening again? That's where the survivors come in. That's where the orphans come in. And you explain how you saw this.
To rebuild a nation, I think that's one of the main things we have to learn from the people of Rwanda, and the orphans in particular, is how you really can, no matter what, you can survive.
So this is it. Tonight I'm very happy to share the stage with Carl Wilkens and to be in the place of Romeo Darrell as well, who is now also in the film. I think this is not just a coincidence. I hope some people say meant to be. Maybe you explain how I ended up here tonight. And so where do I start? The history of genocide, I don't claim myself to be an expert on it, since sometimes, especially when there is so many aspects that get involved, political, academics, and social. But I think tonight I thought maybe I'll just tell you the story. It's going to be hard since it's big audience and I like interactive audience. How I do remember, because I was too young, not really to forget, but to understand what was happening. And so 25 years ago today, I was possibly, so today is May 22nd, I was somewhere in the middle of the country in Gitarama, and 25 years ago today, I don't really remember any day. I think the only day I remember for sure is the 7th of April. And the only reason I do remember is because we have been told, you also, all of you have heard, the 7th of April, the plane was shot, and then people start to get killed. But I think I'm not going to go into historical background, but this is what was used by the colonial power to measure the noses, to distinguish who is going to be the Tutsi, who is going to be the Hutu. I'm not going to talk about it. But I was born from these people. This is my mom, and this is my dad. And I think I look a little bit from everybody of both. So this is just a clip that I clipped and tried to find. I don't think we have a lot of pictures from our family. So these guys met back in the 60s, and my dad was studying to be a priest in what we call seminary in Rwanda. And my mom, she wanted to be a Catholic nun. So very interesting mixture, right? And so in my dad's family, I'm sorry, there were only 2 boys. So my dad and my uncle, actually 3. And one of my brother, he was too young, but one of my uncle, he was killed in Bujumbura back then, and then my grandfather decided to call my dad to give up being a priest and to get married the nun. So it's very interesting. So, and then I'm the 9th kid among 11th. So I was born on December 25th in 1984. And so I was born in a very small village called Shorongi outside of the capital city, Kigali. So I grew up there, And when I was about 7 years old, this is 1992, and we've heard things from the neighbors that, you know, we start to be, people start to be skeptical. And some people, my father had the reputation of being a really tough guy, a mean guy. In 1992, I remember it was close to the Christmas. I came from school, and then we, as usual, in the afternoon, would take the cows to find food in the bush. And we saw the body, many bodies of people flowing in Nyabarongo, in the river. So this is the river. And the river, it's really dirty, as you can tell. But this time it was not only dirty, it was smelling kind of bloody. And then the cows couldn't even take the water. We ran really quick home, and then we told our parents what we saw. They knew already, but we didn't know because we were too young, and they didn't want to scare us. A few days later, and then our neighbors that we did not share the same ethnicity, the Hutu to be precise. Some Hutus, they were too extreme, and they hated us so much, and they were kind of singing around our gates, and one night they were throwing the stones over the roof. And one night, my father was a school teacher in area, and he was coming from teaching, and then he get caught up, he get beaten, and then another guy who was a Hutu, a really good friend of mine, a son of this lady right here, Catherine, and he jumped to save my dad, and he get beaten as well. They throw them in a beans plantation we had, and then in the evening, my mom was going home, and she heard some people screaming, and she took them inside the house. The next day, where my dad was going to the hospital, and the son of Catherine, and Catherine came in our home. She said, you know, I've heard that you will be killed tonight. And so please do your way, manage your way to, is my English understandable so far? And she said, please leave. I don't want you to hear to scream. Because Catherine, back in days, and this is what I was told before, she had a reputation to always hide families, my own family, and back in days before even I was born. And so I came, and this time was me and my brother Benjamin and my sister Kadete and my cousin sister. And so my mom said, okay, guys, today it's different, so pick up what you like, and then go to Catherine's house. She will tell you what to do. And then please don't even, don't show. I knew what was going on because I knew my dad was beaten a day before. My younger brother and my young sister didn't know. And so we went to Catherine's house. She didn't hide us in the house, but instead she took us in a sugarcane plantation close to the river that I just showed you. And we stayed there, and at night we could see home far from home. And then the night, the fire, we can hear the destroying the house and everything. And so my mom and dad managed their own way to move. They came to Catherine's house again. They came to pick up from a sugar plantation. Before it was morning, and then we moved. We went to a commune. It's like a mayor's office because my dad knew the mayor before, and we were asking, can you save us? And the mayor said, not this time. So we went to the hospital nearby that was run by the Catholic nun, and we pretended to bring my dad in a house, in a hospital, since, he was beaten. And then we stayed there for a night. And the next day, my old sister Claire, who was in town, she was going for a high school in town, and she came and get us, and then we went to Kigali. So I'll come back to those pictures. So we moved from this place, we went to this Kichukiro, and then so our life between 1992 and 93, it was moving a place to another place. because when the killer couldn't find us in the house, they were tracking us everywhere we went. And then my dad's name became huge. And so in 1993, a little bit earlier, to those, Rwandans in the room who are a little bit older? Yes, 1, 2, 3, yes. So you remember the Radio RTRM. So it's a RTRM radio. It's known as the hatred radio. And so, but also so many propagandas were going on in the newspaper. I was 9 years old. I didn't know anything. All these things is what I pull up on the internet just to give you hints. And so these are 10 commandments of the Hutu, just to tell you how so many things, hatred is being taught everywhere. The public, the figures, the local authorities all teaching, the newspapers is preaching the hatred and making us look really bad. And particularly this newspaper, it's called Kangura, Wake Up, and Stay Batutsi Bwoko Bw'Imana. It's basically saying these Tutsis that consider themselves as the people of God, what are you going to do? How are you going to survive this machete? And that's how roughly I can translate. And so, and the reason why they used to see, they were like making some things that the Tutsi possibly came from somewhere in Abyssinia. And so throwing people in a river were sending them, there was called the shortcut to send them where they came from. But I'm not going to go into those details. So we moved in Kichukiro, and as I told you, my family was moving one side to another side. We end up being in one of church in Kichukiro, and then in a church we met a lot of people, mainly Tutsis, but also some other Hutus that were not being part of the extremist Hutus. And then we were packed in a room and couldn't breathe, so we decided to divide ourselves into 2 groups. We went in another place, a small house that my brother had just bought, and then the older siblings stayed in a cathedral. And the night of the 6th, we had a huge explosion. For those who know Kigali, it's a part of Kicukiro called Kagarama. You can see the airport from home. So we went outside to see what happened because we had an explosion from the airport, and then we saw the flame of fire. And then so the next day, my mom said, you know what, guys, I think prepare to move. Go pick up whatever you like, because the next day we may leave and go somewhere. So this time I clearly knew, I was 9 years old, but because of the routine of previous events, I knew that we are going again to move to nowhere. We didn't really know where to go. So I went and picked up whatever I liked, and then we had a lunch. After we have a lunch, but the night was really crazy because we had like a gunshot in Kigali. Those who are in Kigali still remember that. And the next day, the 7th, I believe, that's the only day I remember, as I told you. And we had lunch. In the afternoon, we saw the truck of soldiers coming in our neighborhood. And then a few minutes later, we start to hear like a gunshot, pa, 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 getting close to us. And my mom is dealing with the dishes in the kitchen. And my dad was listening to the radio on the other side of the house. And we heard to our very close neighbor a gunshot. And I was in the backyard. I'm trying to see, when you are like 9 years old, you hear all those things. I was scared already, but not really at that point when I had the gunshot. And then tried to join my mom in the kitchen. And I tried to go to see my dad. I'm trying to see who is going to be more protective and fight these guys. And while I'm trying to go both those zigzag, and I saw this guy pushing my dad in the backyard when I was up. I stayed, and I said, yeah, it's over. And so as everybody else, when 9 years old kids, you see your dad is a hero. He's going to, as Americans say, kick ass, everyone, Sorry for the expression. But I said, my dad is going to kick us. Nobody will touch me. But this time, I said, being humiliated and being pushed, I said, no, they cannot save. And so they put him on one side on a bench, which was there. And at the same time, I moved close to the window of the kitchen where my mom was. And I have millions of ideas. What is going to happen? This guy has like AK-47, and then with the knife on the top. I'm wondering if I'm going to be killed by the top knife or being shot. I wonder if maybe it's going to go to have, many millions of thoughts. And so he asked me a lot of questions. My dad gave him whatever he had asking, and he gave him his ID. He gave him some money he had in a pocket and threw him in, and then said, no, this is not enough. And then while all this is going on, some are still torturing one of the wife of the neighbor. The husband have been shot, but the neighbor, we can hear like screaming, whatever, like asking the mercy to be finished. And so apparently she was being tortured. And then the guy went back, but he came with the guy, Muhammad. And Muhammad was a local leader who was showing them which is houses Tutsis, or even in some cases who is not a Hutu, who is not on their side, who is whatever, but mainly who is a Tutsi house. And Muhammad was in a corner of the house holding a spear, and then he looked at us, he looked to my dad, the soldier is gone, he threw the fence. The fence was not as a fence here, it's a trees. And then he went back, and then Muhammad went again and where they took my dad from, and then my dad said, Iruka, run. And then I ran through the fence. I went in the bushes, really. I met two other guys, Andrew and Michael. I'm putting names in English. And I said, hey, kid, come over. I went to them, and then we sat down. A few minutes later, we had a gunshot, and then we saw them passing through the bush, around the bush that we were hiding in. I went to the next house, and then Michael and Andrew took my arm to go. And then I said, let me go check to my dad. I went check to my dad, I went down, blood down, and I said, you know what, let me go. I went back home, and I never knew anything from the rest of my family since then. So I keep moving with them. At some point, we end up in another school, far, far away from home. And from that day to this day in a genocide, I lost the track. The only thing I was, I guess, in my mind, a day before, I brought a rosary. Where did I put it? 1 second. So do you know, it's a rosary, right? A chapelet, right? So my mom gave me a rosary. I'm coming from a Catholic family. And so she gave me, it's a lot of things, but you know, the rosary is. She gave me a rosary. So, you know, the Catholics, sometimes they count all these kind of things. Huh? I still don't know. But the only thing I was saying, God, please help me to see my mom before I die. Oh, please, God. And so because the thing is, we knew, I was sure, I knew that I was at some point going to be killed. But I really wanted to die near my mom. And so since I didn't know, but again, because I was a kid, I didn't know how the bullet really works. I thought maybe after killing my dad, it went through and then, you know, kind of a remote control bullet, and then find my dad and pick him and die and pick everybody die. That's why, you know. And so I said, maybe she's died. Maybe she's not. I was not really sure. And another day I forget, and then I will ask God, please, I really don't know if maybe the next hour I'm going to be found and be killed. And to this particular school, and this was maybe, I would say, the end of April. It's when Andrew and Michael gave me to another family. And then the school get attacked. And then they shot in the air. Everybody runs in a school. And then killers killed everybody who was in the field. And they start to come in classrooms. So in the classrooms, you know how you have desks and put desks, and so we can have a free space to put the mattress on. So they killed everybody. I was in the last class, and they kicked our door. They tell everybody to go out. And while everybody's getting out, I was trying to squeeze in the same door as well, getting out. But I can hear people outside. Some are being chopped by machetes, very creepy sounds. And I say, you know, I don't wanna be cut by the machetes. Let me wait a little bit. While everybody's kind of going out, I went out behind, and then I went to hide under the mattress. But I was breathing, and then I thought maybe these guys will come and see that I'm breathing, and then find me. And then I tried to move from under the mattress. I tried to jump in a window, because in the room also there was a girl who was probably my age. She was so brave. She just jumped, and, you know, like a superhero, and jumped outside, and she went outside. But I tried 3 times, and I failed. I said, no, I'm not going to do this. And I went to hide myself in a pupitre, in desks. So I could only put this, and then I laid the shoes and the legs on a bench. So you could clearly see that I'm hiding only here, but the rest of my body is visible. So I spent there a night. The next day, the killers came to take the properties, and they took everything, and I still have my rosary counting, oh God, please help me. I don't want to get found. And for somehow, I feel like God have been always not responding my prayer. I could clearly that they are taking everything out, and then one guy say, oh, I see the shoes of my kid. And then I say, oh my God. And he came and pulled my shoes, and then I pulled my leg, and then he called, hey, Baringa, Baringa, harakoka kachirika zumano. Like, there is a snake that's still alive here. And while Baringa is coming, I show up and I put my hands up. I knew this from American movies, the Vietnam movies, that this means forgive me. I say, okay, forgive me. I say, where you from? And spontaneously I say, I'm from the north. And the north of Rwanda, maybe the Rwandans here, is known as, very extremist. So pretty much telling them I'm one of them, and don't kill me. So they believed it. They took me with them. As the genocide was moving on, I end up by in Congo. As I convinced these guys I'm with them, they keep going with them. The journey went on and on. But when the genocide came, finished, I returned to Rwanda sometimes in 1995. And so now I get updated from the memories and everything, and dates and hours. And then I reunited by my sister, who raised me ever since up to date. So what keeps me going, and I'm sure I share this with many orphans. After the genocide, that's another story too. If I tell, it will take possibly another hour. But most of the time, the mechanism of my own, which I believe I share with many Rwandans who are here today, was to build a kind of a strength and hope. A hope, or maybe start by hope and the strength. And strength to keep, trying to keep pushing and pushing, and the hope that maybe one day the life is better. And then in my experience, the life was better, and that's why I'm here today sharing my story, and thank you so much.
I'd like to invite our panel members to come forward now as I introduce them. So Dr. Emmanuel Habimana is from Rwanda, also a young man that was living out near Mudende, near where the university was, and comes from a mixed heritage. One of the questions that always comes, well, can't you tell who's a Hutu and who's a Tutsi? No, you can't many times. And Emmanuel comes from a mixed background, and we'll hear his story next briefly. Carl Wilkens served as the ADRA director in Rwanda during this time, chose to send his family home and write out the genocide in Rwanda, saving many orphans and others, distributing food and caring for them there. And then Carl will share his story towards the end. So let's go ahead and have a seat up here. Emmanuel, we'll turn it over to you now to share a bit of your background.
Thank you, Dr. Hart, and thank you, Emmanuel, for your courage to come here and tell us your story. And the story of Emmanuel is very representative, really shows what kind of experience that people are going through for about 3 months, you know, from the month of April 1994 all the way up to, I think, June. So I'm not going to say much, but I'm going to give you a little bit of introduction of what was the situation right before the genocide, briefly, what was the situation during genocide, and what was the situation after genocide. And I'll tell you a little bit about some of my relatives who are lost during the genocide. So I was about 12 years old in 1994 when the genocide started. Again, I remember what precipitated the events was the shooting down of the president planned down at the time. I mean, there have been episodes of violence before, but nothing to the scale of what happened after the president plane was shot down. So my opinion is that even though the president plane was shot down, that should have not been an excuse to start attacking people of Tutsi heritage and killing them. That was just a lame excuse. So today we condemn that without any excuse, that the plane was shot down and that was the excuse for killing people. So we do not accept that reason. We condemn it. Killing is bad, no matter what precipitated it. So I just want to make clear that point. And so right before the genocide, as I remember it, there were so many political activities going on. There was so many political parties that were in opposition. And there was some sort of negotiation going on to share power between the ruling party and so many opposition parties. And that ended up becoming a genocide when there was no compromise and Tutsis started being attacked. Okay, so Tutsis started being attacked in Kigali, and moderate Hutus, they were being killed. And eventually, what was a process to get our country to become democratic, that became a genocide against the Tutsis. So that's the unfortunate history of Rwanda, and we cannot do anything about it. So right after the plane was shot down, there was a war between the Rwandan rebels and the government forces at the time. The war intensified, and the genocide intensified as well. So, and then there was a mass exodus of refugees from the eastern part of the country to, towards the west. And, there was war, there was mass exodus of refugees, there was total chaos, lack of order, lack of law, and so people will just simply kill others, and they will not be held responsible for that. So that was a hard moment for our country, as I remember it, and I can remember my family going through that period when we had that our relatives were killed. So some of my first relatives to be killed was my grandmother. Her name was Maria Kalara. She died because she could not run away. She was old. So is my grandfather. They all died within the first few months. There was also my grandmother from my father's side. She died. She could not run away. The whole family of my uncle, Inyas, was killed. And so today, the way I choose to remember them is to remember their values. What did they believe in? What did they cherish? And so, starting with my grandmother, she valued education so much. She worked so hard to make sure that her kids were educated. And so today that has motivated me to go through school, starting from, undergraduate up to now. And so my other person who was inspirational was my uncle, Inyas. He was a high school teacher. So today, I'm very happy to be a teacher here at Loma and other places that I've been teaching before, because that keeps me going. His spirit, his love for teaching keeps me going. So that's the way I choose to remember them. What was their values, and how can I keep their spirit moving? So the genocide ended in around July 1994. And some of us, went through the ordeal. Emmanuel is here as a survivor. And so we are trying to regain our dignity, our values. So the most important thing to do is to be able to work together and to unite ourselves. And that's the theme in Rwanda. Remember, unite, and we want to encourage peace. So I'm very happy to meet Emmanuel today, and I'm very glad of his work, and I support his dream to come up with many other projects to be able to unite Rwandans. Thank you.
Thank you, Amable. As you may have caught, he started off as a high school science teacher, but ended up doing a PhD at Purdue University in pharmaceutical chemistry, and now is on our faculty here in the School of Pharmacy. We're delighted to have him. I next want to turn to Carl Wilkens. Carl has an incredible story. Chose to ride out the genocide in Kigali and sheltering who he could, protecting, feeding, and others. He was the ADRA director at that time, a development agency based in Rwanda. We've had his story several times here at Chapel at Loma. It's an inspiration story of courage in the face of incredible challenges. So, Carl, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. No, they got me wired. Thank you all so much for coming out this evening. Many of you can appreciate when I say 25 years is like nothing. I spend a lot of time with high school students, middle school, college students, and of course 25 years can seem like an eternity. But for many of us, we can remember 25 years ago very clearly. Very clearly. And to know that you've come together this evening in an act of support and solidarity, it means a lot. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to my brother Emmanuel. You know, it's interesting. I always say in Rwanda, everybody's connected. Dr. Amabla's father actually worked with me as a nurse at one of the clinics. He was a little guy. He was telling me this evening at dinner, he remembered when I came and spoke at a church there. And I said, boy, you're making me feel good. Now, if you could tell me what I talked about that day, then I... But no, Rwanda, that interconnection in Rwanda is really just kind of a small snapshot of really how we're connected as a human race. What do they say, 7 degrees? You know, you meet somebody and then somebody and they'll know. And this shared humanity is, I think, one of the most important things we need to grab a hold of when we're trying to understand something like a genocide. Because a genocide speaks powerfully against the idea of shared humanity. Genocide speaks powerfully in the idea that my world would be better without you in it. This kind of exclusive problem solving. And in Rwanda, people try to figure out how and what, and you've heard the different stories. You know, Rwanda, some people simplistically would like to say, oh, Rwanda, isn't that where Hutus were killing Tutsis? And no, extremists were killing there. But I love the picture you put up there of Catherine, Emmanuel, and the legacy that this lady had there. Unfortunately, she was not in the majority. Had she been in the majority, the genocide would not have happened. But we don't lose sight of those people who really understood what shared humanity really meant. Rwanda is a country where you do have these groups called Hutu and Tutsi, but they're not Hutu and Tutsi. They're Hutu and Tutsi. They're married together. Rwanda is a story of political turmoil, tearing apart relationships. And today we don't have to talk long or difficult to try to explain about political turmoil tearing apart relationships. So what can we learn from this story of Rwanda, where 25 years ago nearly 1 million people were killed? Primarily the Tutsi tribe. There was no question in mind, if you were a Tutsi, you were marked as the enemy. But if you were married, if you were somehow sympathetic, if you would not go along with the killers, you were marked too. And so my wife and I moved to Rwanda. Oh, we had one more picture there you were going to show us, Emmanuel.
Yeah.
We'll have to ask you about that during the Q&A time. I just love looking at these pictures, though, of Emmanuel's. And some of them are really hard to look at as well. This is one of the churches. You know, Dr. Hart, you mentioned people coming to churches. Primarily Catholic churches. That's where people ran. I was there with the Adventist, Seventh-day Adventist Church, Adventist Development Relief Agency. I used to wonder, why don't they come to the Adventist churches, primarily? Why are they going? I know the Catholics greatly outnumbered, but there were also these Catholic fathers and sisters who didn't come to Rwanda for a mission term of 6 years or something. They came for life. They were speaking Kinyarwanda. And there was that combination of spirituality and God and the international community that was often represented at these churches where people in 1994 were no longer safe. This is kind of a fun picture for me to share because today I'm the age of my father in that picture. That's our family in 1994. We thought the war was over. We'd had 3 years of war in the country. At ADRA, we had gotten $300,000 from Canada. We were rehabbing health centers, hoping for the people, nearly 1 million people who'd been chased out of their homes by 3 years of war in Rwanda, wanting to go back home, and when they got back, they would find health care and other facilities. So my dad had a financial background, and he was there helping with that project. It was a lot of money in a short amount of time. My mom came over to visit there. And on the Sunday before the plane was shot down, we actually went camping out at Lake Kivu. That Sunday was Easter Sunday. It's very hard to understand how on Sunday, Easter Sunday, more than 80% of the country is in church. Many of the planners of the genocide are in church. And come Thursday, some of them will be killing those they were sitting next to in church on Sunday. But this is not something that's going to happen in 3-4 days like that. And Emmanuel alluded to that process of changing our thought pathways. As I try to figure out, how does somebody go? Because in Rwanda, super generous. You come to their home and they'll give you the shirt off their back, literally. They'd offer you drinks that would cost them days to earn just to pay for one bottle of Fanta. And they would give that to you generously. How do they go from generous to murderous? How does that happen? And today, where I'd like to get to with you, and then we'll open up for a little Q&A, is how do you go back? Is it possible to go back from murderous to generous again? And one of the tools that really helps me, and it's really interesting to be here at Loma Linda University, is this idea of neural pathways. How do we build the pathways that construct enemies, that we see people who were once our neighbor, we now see them as enemies. We see people in the idea of shared humanity, but then we see them as a threat. And our ability to build pathways to eventually take the life of our neighbor can also be used to build I believe, to go back. You see, we have no question that people can build pathways to murder, because we see the bodies and we hear the stories. What I often question, is can they go back? Is it possible? Or have some people gone too far? So this evening I won't take the time to get into the story of what we were doing. I will just simply say that when the embassies all decided that everybody should leave, all of the foreigners should leave, and they said, hey, the president's plane was just shut down. I don't think it's a good idea for us to fly out of here. Let's drive out. But don't bring any Rwandans. Okay? Those who are planning the genocide, we rightfully condemn them for killing people just based on their ID card. But us, known by many as the leaders of the free world, are making a decision that we can, if they're Ugandan, okay, if they have a document that shows they're Ugandan, they can get in your car. But if they're Rwandan, no. And it'll be up to you and your questions. Who could have stood up against these planners of the genocide? Whether it's the United Nations with 2,500 soldiers there, whether it's leaders of churches, massive influence in the country, what the leaders are, whether it's educational institutions, who could have stood up against them? But what my wife and I know is a young lady who had lived and worked in our home for nearly 4 years, who loved on our kids, who we all loved her, a young man who came in the evening as the watchman. They both had Tutsi ID cards and they would be killed. And we were confident of that. There was no question in our mind. So when the embassy said, no, you got to leave, but you can't bring any Rwandans, my wife and I go in the room, the bedroom, we talk, we pray, and we come to the decision that I'll stay. There's enormous privilege that foreigners had in this country. Maybe I can use that privilege for the sake of these two people in our home. And I'll introduce it to my wife in a moment here, because as I was thinking about today and sharing here, and this time to come together and remember what happened in Rwanda, this time to come together and examine how do we unite, how do we come together, this time to come together and renew. Those are the three words that the Rwandan government is putting forth, especially this year, but every year. Remember, unite, and renew. I wrote a little piece. I love my wife's piano playing. She's an incredible pianist. So I'm like, I got to find a piano here this evening because I want you to hear that. She always wants me to be part of that, and since I don't sing, I wrote a little poem that I'll share with you in a bit this evening here as we move to our Q&A time. But Theresa will take the kids to eventually to Nairobi. I will stay in the country. Those two people in our house will not be killed. I will start working with some of the people who are now in prison for genocide. I will be working with the potential for good and evil in all of us. I'll be working with some of the people who are planning the genocide. I'll end up working with two of my my ADRA Rwandan colleagues, Hutu men who had Tutsi wives. Their ID card would let them through the roadblocks. I'll be working with those two men to bring food and water and medicine to 3 groups of orphans. But where I wanted to go with you this evening before starting our Q&A time was I get to go back to Rwanda every year, usually with teachers. This last summer I was there with teachers and high school students. This is Charlotte standing in front of 40 men who have confessed to killing their neighbors, and they want to go home. And so they're in what I would call a reinvent yourself camp. This is where my limited understanding of neural pathways is starting to kick in and help me try to figure out what's going on here. Is it possible? You know, we have pathways, very strong pathways. They say the more we fire a pathway, the stronger it gets, the stronger that outside coating, you know, like my coat sleeve, the myelin sheathing, the stronger it gets. And for years I fired the pathway killers, genocidaires, rapists. But now as they're given opportunities to do projects in the country, to rebuild the country, to build roads, to do radical terracing, to make bricks, to build schools, other little pathways are forming. And we have a choice. Are we going to fire those little pathways and allow them to get larger? These guys, there's no fence, there's no wall around this, so I can't really call it a prison labor camp. The guards don't have guns. Rwanda said, okay, we got 3 levels after the genocide. Those who planned, level 1. Those who are really the mid-level, make it happen organizers, level 2. And the ordinary people, level 3. So these camps are just level 3 people, okay? And we don't have time to get into the other parts of it. But these people, they're there after having confessed, after going through a process called gachacha. The director of the largest orphanage there on the right, Damas. Some of you maybe who follow Humans of New York, they featured him last October. He kind of blew it up. They did like 7 features on Damas, postings on him and his story during the genocide. Damas became a gachacha judge after the genocide. Judge/facilitator to facilitate the confessions for people to learn the truth. Those tapes they've been playing in their mind for years. How did my family die? What were the details? Bringing some more truth into those tapes and helping people begin to process that. The young man on his left was a little kid who was there. Probably he's going to be around your age, Emmanuel, I'll guess. He might have been around 9 at the time of the genocide. And he was one of the kids in the biggest orphanage that we were working with. Today he's a music teacher there at the after-school programs that happen at that orphanage. But the men back here that I was telling you about, they're free to go to church on the weekend if they want. They got 10 days every year to go home for a wedding or funeral. This idea of little pathways, man, maybe one of those guys when he gets to church, he's an amazing singer, huh? Tiny pathway in my brain. Or am I just going to fire the pathway? No, he's a killer. I have so much more control over the pathways I can build. One of the kids who wrote to me, the schools I get to go to, she says, as I looked at the story of Rwanda, I realized that if we only define people by one pathway, aren't we making that pathway stronger and diminishing every other pathway? So Rwanda is giving the people who committed genocide many, many different opportunities to reinvent themselves, and the people who survived to also reinvent themselves. And I'd love to get in to explore that with you. But before we do, I just want to share this little poem. And Theresa, if you wouldn't mind, just a little bit of music. And I usually hem and haw for a while just to let her play. I actually be quiet. Just to let her play for a minute. We'll see where the volume settings are there. As we explore these three, they probably got the volume in the PA booth too. You go ahead and start, and we'll see. Yeah, it's coming. It's coming. It's coming. If they have the power, they'll turn the volume up maybe a little bit, but I can hear you. These three realms, we might call them, remember, unite, renew. I want to strengthen that pathway. Every time I fire that pathway, remember, unite, renew. Remember, unite, renew. But I don't want to remember. It's too painful. You know, I've just got to move forward. I've got to leave the past in the past. Unite? Unite with who? The people who killed my family, who killed my best friend's wife? Impossible. Renew? I'd love to. Oh, I'd love to renew, but how? I have nothing. It's much worse than starting from zero. It's impossible. These three, remember, unite, renew, can they actually blend their voices into a trio, into a three-part harmony? A harmony so masterfully interwoven, so powerful as to be heard around the planet? A planet that is howling in pain, writhing in conflict, wasting away in despair? Remember, unite, renew. In remembering, we know why uniting is our best choice, calling out our best selves. In unity, we form a foundation for healing, for hope, for renewal. And in renewal, we honor those we remember. Their legacy lives on and shines bright. Remember, unite, renew. These three have been rubbing shoulders since the beginning of time, weaving in and out of each other's realms, both in silence and in searing proclamations. And when we close our eyes for the last time, we will have only just begun to understand the power in this woven cord of three. We will have just begun to see how the impossible was made possible by our choices. I believe this love that fuels and powers and nourishes, remember, unite, renew. We find this in this process of finding the good. Remember, unite, renew. I think we can together. Unite, that's my pathway of choice moving forward. And renew, oh yeah. Renew for me is defined in finding the good. Thank you, darling. Thank you.
Okay, we'd like to spend the next perhaps 20 minutes taking responses, questions, comments. I think you've got the message up there how to text things in, where my team has gone to, but somehow I'm going to receive those texts and see if there's some answers. They're up there, so go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Hart. So I'm going to start with the most hard-hitting question of the, which is, where can we find the movie?
The movie is on Vimeo. If you Google Komora to heal, Komora to heal in English, so you'll find it. There is a full version of it.
Good. You all got that? Komura to heal, Komura to heal.
Yes, sir.
A Vimeo film that you can pick up and look at.
What do you think we can learn from this today when we see such strong divides in our country?
It's addressed to
U.S. politics.
To me.
Who would like to answer it?
Would you repeat the question one more time?
What can we learn from it in the U.S. today from this experience?
That's a tough one. Well, I think as a Rwandan, you know, the very first time, I guess, I think it's like a perspective of us Africans, how we see America as a role model in a democracy, in human rights. So to me, it will be very catastrophic if you follow the same path as Rwandans. Because there is a kind of a tendency, sorry, I'm not judging your society, that you here in the West, you see the legacy of civil wars or violence, mass atrocities as that there in Africa. But I think there is, correct me if I'm wrong, that's there is not such things. But as I was telling earlier with the Dr. Hill and Jim, and if you can learn that what happened to Rwanda happened before us, 50 years before us in the Holocaust against the Jews. Even after Rwanda, there are so many other civil wars and mass atrocities, mass killings within Africa or elsewhere. I think there is a very strong lesson to learn that what happened to us, it's not a crisis of Rwandans themselves, it's not a crisis of Darfur, it's not a crisis of Syria, it's a human crisis, and therefore we can prevent from happening elsewhere, including here in America. I think that's what we need to, you guys, Americans, need to learn from those conflicts. Thank you.
You know, I would add to that, Emmanuel, that one of the tools to be able to do that, I've learned in Rwanda, is that we don't have to be defined by what we don't have. So many times I feel we're operating out of a position of scarcity. And in Rwanda, many of the people have said, you know, if I operate from what I don't have, I will not operate. So I look at what I have, and I'll be defined by what I have. And I think what we have in common is so much more powerful than so many of the things that are dividing us. And so that idea of looking at what we have, not being defined by what we don't have, is to me another really powerful tool that comes out of the Rwandan story. And the last one I would mention is this idea of singularly defining somebody or some institution. Rwanda has shown us in their moving forward process that you don't have to be defined by your past. You can be defined by what you do next. But that needs an environment that's open to that next step. And it takes all of us to not just fire that one single solution or that one single bad memory that we have associated with somebody and be fixated on that. We don't ignore it. But when we look for the good, we're not diminishing that. We're simply opening our eyes up to what we have instead of simply being focused on that one negative thing. And so, yeah, 2 cents worth to throw in with that. Thanks, Emmanuel.
Have humanitarian efforts been allowed back in to help rebuilding?
In so many ways, yes. Some have been coming, but also, like elsewhere, I remember I was talking to a friend where we talked about some so-called human rights or humanitarian interventions but really don't help much, other than taking advantages of a crisis or making things worse. But some have been able to, you know, help and do some good stuff. I don't have any.
You know, they've come back though to a very different Rwanda. Those who were there before, came back to a very different Rwanda, not only in the way that it was decimated, but also in a new strategy. In Rwanda, they've said, we are the lead partner, which is the way it should have always been. And we have a strategy. People might like to come and say, oh, we were working here, and we maybe we'll build a school here, or we'll do something there. And the government says, you are welcome, we welcome and we need your partnership, but we're the lead partner. This is our country. We are brilliant people. We have human resources. And so come and join with us in the rebuilding, but understand who the lead partner is in this process. And I think that's been really, really healthy, really, really important. Because when we go in often as foreigners, as if we're the lead partner, and we leave, because we always do, we leave followers behind instead of leaders. And Rwanda has said that's not going to happen here. And one of the ways they're also ensuring this rebuilding, and we're the lead partner, is the empowerment of women. They said that in our new constitution, 30% of our decision-making bodies, starting from the parliament and going right down, will be women. Today in Rwanda, more than 64% of the parliament are women in Rwanda. So this rebuilding, this intentionality, the empowerment of women, it's a much different Rwanda that people are coming back and finding there today to partner with.
There are currently several medical schools in Rwanda, and Loma is involved to start another one in Kigali at the university there. It's supposed to open in September. So education has been prominent. Paul Kagame, the president, has made the vow to get internet connection to every village in Rwanda. Those of you who know Africa, you know the challenge of that. And yet it's a very concentrated country with a high density population. And so it's probably currently the most connected country in all of Africa because of that commitment.
Also, can I?
Yes.
Sure. Also, I think in the medical sphere, I think there was still some need. I think in my huge, especially when it comes to the trauma or some survivor. I have so many in my own family. My own brother is kind of alcoholic. Comment on dit alcoholic? Alcoholic.
An alcoholic.
Alcoholic, right. And so many trauma. So many, I think, people. So many things. I mean, therapy is kind of a new concept to us. I just started one. Sorry, I don't know if I'm supposed to say that publicly.
It's fine. It's fine.
But it's really funny.
It's inspiring, actually, Emmanuel.
But in Rwanda, I don't think if we ever had a therapy when I was younger, I wouldn't have some problems that I have today.
It's a wonderful book that's just come out called Untamed, about a young lady who was about your age, Emmanuel, during the genocide, and she's written about the trauma afterwards, but also the healing and the getting therapy and bringing it out in the open, that this is nothing connected with shame. And in the same way we would not, deny people medical treatment, we would not deny them and a diabetic their insulin. We have to be mindful about this segment of our lives too in mental fitness.
Another question.
How successful have the community courts been in repairing and mending relationships after the genocide?
Wobbly, you have to jump in anytime too.
Okay. So, as I remember, after the genocide, the government did not have resources to carry out justice throughout. So they came up with a system called Gacaca, which was a traditional court, not the justice in the modern sense. So in the Gacaca, people will come together and they will try to recollect what happened, who killed who, and then ask for forgiveness,
It would be Thursday afternoon. Did you, as a young person, witness these? I remember, at least I often heard, they would close school on Thursday afternoon, they would close shop, they would go to the local soccer field, and some who were willing to confess would confess in front of the community. Did you attend any of those gacaca?
Yes, I did. So I attended a couple of them. Of course, my situation is different because I lived outside Rwanda for a long time. From 1996, we moved out of Rwanda because my family wanted to go to a country where we could learn English and be able to get some education in English. So I'll go back and forth from Kenya and Rwanda. And whenever I went back, I attended some of those. And so it is the reconciliation happened on a community level through Gacaca because there was simply not enough resources to help people get justice through modern sense of justice. So right now, people have been able to reconcile. I do not think that Rwandans at this point really, that animosity is not there anymore. Maybe a few instances here and there, but generally there's no animosity, and there is little chance of genocide happening again because people have learned that the consequences of a genocide can be very, very bad. So I think there's some level of reconciliation, appreciable level of reconciliation happening.
Another really important part about Gacaca was that people learned where family members were buried. They learned about their final hours. This idea of what we don't know, we think in stories, and so we fill in what we don't know with our imagination. And Gacaca helped to bring the truth to light. You know, those who confessed were given half of their prison sentence was cut in half. And so some people would say, oh, what good is that? You know, are they really sincere in their confession? But there's more to confession than simply whether you believe the person is sincere or not. Those who want to learn the truth about what happened to their family members, really important part of that healing process, of stopping that tape that has been playing incessantly in your mind as you begin to learn some truth about that and move forward. We're first steps moving forward in this healing process. It's a brilliant thing. You know, restorative justice is not easy. If it was easy, we'd all be doing it, huh? It's messy and it's open to when you take advantage of something. It's open to abuse in different ways. It's not neat and tidy, but Rwanda is showing us powerfully how it is possible for that to happen.
Another couple questions.
What are some good ways to support those that lived through the genocide?
Well, I think there's so many ways to help. I think most of us, some of us who are kids now, we are growing up, creating small projects, especially in the villages. You know, providing good health care, I guess, or means to access a good health care. If you guys, anybody has a project to go in Rwanda, take a rural place in Rwanda, establish something that maybe will help them to generate small incomes to them, because, you know, poverty is still something, I mean, the life needs to be improved in so many ways, especially in survivors' communities. But I think, in my personal opinion, the main danger we face is trauma and memories, and there is no adequate way to treat trauma, or, you know, because, I mean, we are now, I guess when we speak about Rwanda, we tend to give a broad picture of how the country has been moved on. But when you go in the families that are faced, by the way, not only for the survivors, but also these perpetrators that are confessed. Because I think we all, as a society, since we all engaged in ourselves in a new Rwanda, both sides need a healing, both sides need a proper therapy, both sides, if anybody has a proper, you know, I don't know. But, you know, this genocide, even a death of one person in a family is something really, But now the whole community, we've lost a sense of humanity. Now we're trying to be humans, you know, because we did not to. But I guess while I was conducting the interviews, I never thought I'll be facing somebody who possibly killed my family. But I did anyways. So then I've come to realize that these people, they suffer the way that I do suffer. And these people that think before they came to kill my family, they were already dead. So you can see them in the eyes. I didn't want to judge them, but you can see when somebody tells you, I killed 12 people in one family, and then starts to say, I'm crying because I lost mine. I cry because I lost my parents. But this guy, he killed, and now he's living with it. Just think about it. I don't know what the medicines for that. I don't know if it's something that we say now is 25 years and this person have healed, or I, even though I'm speaking today, that have been healed. I have my own to cope with it. I have opportunities that most of Rwandans in the rural areas where I'm from never got, even from Kigali, honestly. So how do we heal this person? How do you make them fully function a human being again? I don't know.
No, but I remember the first time Emmanuel expressed to me words of empathy for those who perpetrated the genocide. And it's one thing theoretically to say that, but it's another thing for somebody who has experienced the pain that you've experienced to sit here and to tell us that they are suffering in the way you are suffering. That is beyond that. Those are some of the most human things anybody can ever say. And I think you are part of that medicine in the healing part. When you're able to honestly from your heart say something like that, that's just not a small cliche phrase. That's earth moving for me.
Maybe one or two more.
Okay. Emmanuel, what is your dream for the future? And can you tell us the story of how you were able to study in the U.S. as an orphan?
My dream, my future dreams, I want to be somebody different. I want to be somebody, you know, I love Marvel movies. I'm 34 years old, but I dream to have like a superpower and save the world. It's crazy, right? So I have a very childish dream, but mostly it's to see self try to be a superhero, saving people in danger, fly somewhere, save somebody, and do all this Hollywood movie cliche thing. But I want to be someone who is established. I have a family of my own. I think having a kid of my own will make me happy, I guess. So the way that I came to America, there's no practical way to say, but fantasizing. I've always loved America very much. And I started learning English and didn't even know where it's going to be. But I met people through what I've been doing in Rwanda, really good people, American people who have been supporting me from that time up to date. And Carl will be one of them. It's not a secret. And many others. I have so many American dads and moms and aunts. And so it's a very long journey. So I don't know how to summarize that. Yeah. Thank you.
One thing I might add, he's at film school in L.A., and the neighborhood is not always the easiest. And there was a time during that time that somebody mugged him at knife point. Yeah. And I thought to myself, seriously? You know, seriously? But as Emmanuel told me the story, he talked about this man who was a vet suffering, I'm sure, from PTSD. And the empathy that I heard, Emmanuel, you share as you recounted that story to me, it just blew me away. Because most of the time for me, I'm thinking about myself and my safety and perhaps the injustice committed against me or something. But I hear you say, you know, that you want to change. And I'm like, no. Part of me is not. We love your spirit of empathy and compassion. And that's just an incredible inspiration. I've had the privilege to be with Emmanuel at high school before. And the kids ask him, how do you keep going? You know? And what's your answer, Emmanuel, when people ask you, how do you keep going?
Just having hope that tomorrow will be different. Praying, I'm a very big believer. So I hate to think that my family suffered and then go somewhere bad place. And so I always believe that God loved my family, that they're somewhere better, and hopefully I'll get to meet them one day. So, yeah. So,
thank you.
I don't know if I ever answered you something because I changed answers a lot.
You did. And you may not remember. We don't always remember what we said, but I remember you telling those high school kids every morning you have a decision to make.
Absolutely. Every day, I guess, I have to remind myself that today is going to be different from yesterday. And so when I began, it was really tough because it was kind of believing in a false hope. How are you going to move when your brother is alcoholic and your neighbors and everything in your neighborhood, everything the same, the poverty. But again, wake up, go look yourself in the mirror, myself in the mirror, and tell myself, today is going to be good, today is going to be different, today is going to be great, and kind of create that. In the beginning was kind of this kind of crazy reciting things, but it became part of my life as I move along.
Yeah.
And it's been part of my life ever since. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Let's end at that. No, one quick announcement. This is part of World Affairs Council. We have a local chapter. I'd like Peg and Jim Hill, both of you, to stand up. Peg is our program manager for World Affairs Council and helps to put together a number of things. You'll be sure and register. We'll get you on the list to receive notices of future meetings. And then there's one, why don't I let you tell about that, Peg, coming up next week that's of particular interest.
We knew in advance that the idea of restorative justice would come up and that we would have people in the audience that were interested in working with others with these issues in mind. So I spent some time looking at who are the people with a lot of wisdom in that area and spoke with the Facing History and Ourselves people who recommended talking about restorative justice and working together on that. And so if there are folks in the room that work with others, I would strongly recommend coming to the program next Thursday. It's called After Genocide, Strategies That Heal Societies Post-Conflict. And I have a few flyers. They were at the front desk when you registered. Some of you may have picked it up there. I'll leave a few right up here at the front desk. And we would welcome you to come and join that. Thank you. And thank you to Dr. Hart and the group we had here. There couldn't be a better World Affairs Council program than having one with people who participated at these different kinds of levels and brought this kind of insight. It's very rare, so I'm glad that so many of you participated.
Let's thank our panel for being with us this evening. Thank you all. Good night.